Today, I'm going to teach you that aggressive opening that will officially kick off the villain era on the chessboard, the Queen's Gambit. But first of all, don't be afraid, because the Queen isn't going anywhere. She's sitting right next to your king, so you won't be sacrificing her. It's an opening that teaches you how to steal elo points from your opponent in just 10 minutes. But first, you need to get to know today's stars. 2 knights, 2 bishops, and just 3 pawns. We can toss the rest in the trash, but these 3 pawns are more important than anything else. No pawns, no ELO. These 3 pawns want to rule the entire world, because all the bargaining will take place here. But the real hero is this pawn. It's moving toward d4. He wants to take over the headquarters, bringing his friend along with him. But not right now. Most people respond by playing to d5. That's when e4 really turns into a bad move. You can play c4 with confidence, because we're starting to write the book. With the Queen's Gambit, we attack the center of the board. Black, on the other hand, has only 2 options. Most people go to great lengths to protect this pawn, but others want to take this pawn. They see it as a free pawn. Maybe I should have named my channel Free Shipping. First, let's talk about the second option. Let's say they took our pawn because they saw it as free shipping, but you can be sure they'll pay the price for it. By playing the e4 pawn, you can now control the center. Congratulations. You can now treat this area like your grandmother's house. Your opponent has no development at the moment. Don't worry, you'll get that pawn back anyway. You've surely come across some idiots with low ELO ratings. They'll definitely want to protect this pawn. If they make that move, you can kiss your mom in joy, because you're gonna win this game. Harass this pawn by moving your pawn to a4 without wasting any time. If your opponent is a fool, he certainly won't want to give you that pawn, but you can just laugh to yourself about it. Let's say you've pocketed his pawn. Your opponent, getting excited, takes your pawn. That's when you can blow up his rook. That must be really embarrassing. Let's imagine that your opponent isn't that stupid and moves the other pawn. You'll still capture that pawn. It's time to mount the horse and take the stage. Take the horse to c3. Sometimes they act like fools and move their pawn to a6. But there's one thing you mustn't forget. Your opponent's pawn is completely trapped. If they touch your knight, they'll make a huge mistake. But even if they don't make that mistake, it doesn't matter anymore. They're low ELO players who waste their entire game trying to protect their pawns. Meanwhile, you're quietly developing your pieces in the background. Smart players execute their plan without giving their pawn a second thought under these conditions. Let's rewind the game a bit, because most people play smartly without doing any of these things. If your opponent moves this pawn to d5 and tries to protect it with a knight, don't hesitate to capture that pawn. If you lose another pawn, don't worry, it's just part of the plan, because now you're very likely to win this game. Now you can move your pawn to e4. The center is completely under your control. That would be amazing, wouldn't it? But I have some bad news. Many smart players will move this pawn to e6 instead of releasing their knight from the stable. By making this move, they effectively reject the Queen's Gambit. In this situation, you might come across dozens of variations, but don't worry. I'll explain them to you without making you memorize them. Don't forget to say thank you to me for helping you improve your ELO rating. Now let's go back. Always pin the knight to c3. That way you'll keep the pawn on d5 on its toes. The elephant is eagerly waiting to go here and there. You, on the other hand, should stay calm and wait for your opponent to move their knight to f6. You can now move your bishop to g5. That way, your opponent won't be able to move their knight anywhere. You'll also have developed your bishop. Our other hero, the pawn, is patiently waiting for the bishop to move, just like a bench warmer. That way, it will be able to move without getting trapped. Let's say your opponent moved their bishop to e7, freeing up their knight. Now, you can push your pawn to e3. If someone tries to pressure filing, try to protect her without pushing her away. You can take a step back, because his opponent has different plans, such as rock. Now, our other elephant, our biggest hero, will be eager to head to d3 or c4. However, if you play your bishop to d3 now and they capture your pawn, that could be a problem, because that could unnecessarily break your heart. That's why you should move patiently and thoughtfully. For now, it's better for the rook to stay on its home square. That's because you need your pawn on c5 for now, and someone needs to protect it. You must take your horse, which is quietly watching the game from the other side, to f3 in your private jet. This move makes no sense. Your opponent isn't going to just sit back and wait. He'll also move his knight to d7, but that doesn't really matter right now. You need to stick to the plan and listen to me. I'll summarize all the moves you need to make in a moment. While the bishop on f1 continues to protect the pawn, move the queen, who is the first lady, to c2. If you can move the elephant to d3 while it's performing its protection duty, that's when you'll have a perfect double attack. The vizier, meanwhile, is winking at c7. This is just one of the potential weak links in the future. You'll constantly see the possibility that black will always move his pawn on square b forward. because he needs to move his bishop, because he's trapped, as if he were in a prison. While black is moving his bishop, your bishop is still sitting there watching TV. It's time to take action, because the number of moves we have left is dwindling. However, in this scenario, you must capture your opponent's pawn on square D. He, in turn, will immediately set a trap for your pawn. The main reason we're doing this is to trap the opponent's bishop on the B7 square. Our bishop, meanwhile, has finally been set free like a bird. We send it to D3 without wasting any time. Compared to the opponent's bishop on B7, ours is in a fantastic position. If your score is high, you'll set up your empire on the right side. If your score is low, you'll castle on the left side. However, my advice is to always castle on the side where the queen is. We especially need to do this in this game, because that's how we'll position our rooks and increase the pressure on our opponent. That way, our pawns will be able to race forward like crazy. Have you ever thought about what the best defense is when you get into bed to sleep? Of course, it's to attack ruthlessly. In chess, there's a psychological reality. If your opponent reacts to your attacks, it means they're afraid. You're not really in any danger. In short, you're considered to be ahead. I'll explain this to you in a different way now. Sticking to the plan, you play D4 first. Your opponent plays D5. Then you play C4. There's a 90% chance he'll respond by moving to the E6 square, thereby rejecting the gambit. Just look at these little kids. They're all waiting impatiently. However, you should move your knight to C3. Your opponent will, of course, bring his knight onto the board. Without wasting any time, you should bring your bishop onto the board to tie your opponent's knight to the tree with a rope. You will then move his bishop to E7. You, on the other hand, can stick to the plan and move your pawn to E3 without a second thought, because your bishop will not get trapped under any circumstances. Black will most likely play the rook move. Now it's time to bring your other bishop into play. If your opponent has any ill intentions toward your pawn on C4, your bishop will have its day. Until then, your bishop can stay home and watch TV. Instead, you can lead your horse by the reins and take it to F3. That will also help your horse develop. Without wasting any time, you should also move your queen one step forward. If your opponent tries to bring their bishop onto the board, that's when they'll make a big mistake, because the knight and pawns will pin them down. Don't hesitate. Use your pawn on C4 to capture your opponent's pawn. Of course, your opponent will now have your pawn. We sacrifice that pawn to carry out our plan, because we need to free up our bishop. Black brought his bishop out, squeezing it even more. And look at our two bishops, they can move freely. Castling on the left side immediately without asking anyone's permission. You must keep moving forward, supporting your pawns with your rooks. What if none of this happens? What if the competitor adopts a different strategy? There's absolutely no need to be afraid or worried. Aside from these scenarios, there's only one other option left. Let's take a look at that one too. First, of course, we move our pawn to D4. Your opponent moves to D5 while you should head towards C4. By sending your pawn to E6, you decline the gambit. Without hesitation, we must move our knight to C3. Your opponent also moves their pawn to C6. This is the move that master players call the Slav defense. Beginners, however, don't even know its name. From this point on, we won't be examining any new variations. That's because the game will most likely have progressed as follows by now. Take a look at this. In our previous scenarios, we had pinned the opponent's knight by moving the bishop out, but right now the knight isn't out yet. Do you remember what I said about our other piece, the bishop? In order for us to move the bishop, our pawn on C4 had to be captured, but that didn't happen either. So what are we going to do now? Of course, we're going to bring our knight out. We need to send the knight to F3 for free. Upon hearing about the free shipping promotion, Black also sends his knight to the F6 square. Our bishop, on the other hand, is now free to carry out its task. Your opponent, of course, has formed a defensive line with his bishop to protect his knight and queen. Now, we must move our pawn on E3. However, we must be careful not to pin our bishop while doing so. Your opponent will move his other knight to D7. The scenario we've set up on C4 is still on hold. That's why we need to move our queen to C2. Your opponent, thinking our bishop on G5 is unprotected, is attacking with a pawn. It's enough to take a step back without changing the bishop's position too much and without compromising our pride. Your opponent will likely retreat to defend themselves. Now, it's our turn. But this pawn must move now. We must take the initiative without waiting for the opponent's pawn on square D. Of course, the opponent didn't just sit idly by and captured our pawn, but none of this is a problem, because all of this is part of the plan. Now we can freely bring our bishop into the fray, and the bishop has now entered the fray. The opponent, meanwhile, is exiling his pawn to b6. But the really interesting part of the story begins right at this moment. He's trying to free his own bishop from his opponent's position. By moving his bishop to b7, he's trying to protect his pawn as usual. Need to move our piece to g1 right away. In this position, the probability of winning for a player with a rating below 2000 is 57%. No one knows this. Now I'm going to show you the key moves needed to achieve checkmate. Your opponent is posing a threat by moving their rook to c8. We, on the other hand, must respond by moving the king to the b1 square. This is one of those rare chess moves that can neutralize all threats. Your opponent is threatening the knight by moving their bishop to b4. You should remember what I told you. The best way to defend yourself is to attack ruthlessly. Without a moment's hesitation, push your pawns forward. Encouraged by his bishop, your opponent will bring his queen into play. Pay no attention to this and keep pushing your pawns forward. This way, you can put pressure on their knight. Your opponent could have captured your knight, but even in that scenario, your pawn could take the pawn on h6. However, your pawn will survive because there's a rook in front of it. Assuming your opponent isn't a foolish player, they'll take your pawn. You should then take their pawn to increase the pressure. The opponent may now start crying silently because it's already too late for everything. The situation on the opponent's king side has become increasingly tense. Black is just thinking, because he doesn't have many options left. It's destroying your horse with a wink. You might panic because you're under a new attack. Maybe you'll run out into the streets and scream. No, just keep watching quietly. Continue applying pressure to your opponent's pawn with your bishop. We're going to launch a two-pronged attack. If you can capture the pawn with any piece, the king's downfall begins. Since your opponent knows this, they're moving their pawn one step forward. But if you're imagining smashing the rook to pieces like a fool would, then you haven't quite understood me. Fortunately, I know you aren't imagining that. The story in this video has only one goal: to trap the king in a small area. That's why we're not attacking the rook. Instead, we need to increase the pressure with our other bishop. We now have two strong bishops in enemy territory waiting for orders. Plus, we still have a queen and a knight. From this point on, any smart move you make could result in checkmate. For example, take a look at this. If your opponent tries to damage our bishop with a pawn, you can attack with your queen to deliver checkmate. However, if your opponent senses this threat and moves their king to a corner, you can send their bishop to the grave. Of course, your opponent will take that pawn, relying on their rook. It doesn't matter at all. You can eliminate their queen with your own. There isn't a single queen left in the game now. You must never be afraid just because the king is left defenseless. Yes, it's dangerous, but we must press on. Wouldn't it be nice if we had the ability to see the future, but keep moving forward without ever forgetting our strategy? The best defense is a good offense. You can use your bishop to take out your opponent's rook on f8. What? But you just said that only fools do that. I hear what you're saying. That's why the timing is crucial. The reason is that the opponent's king is cornered like a scared cat. This is exactly the fundamental principle of chess. High-rated players have grasped what I'm saying. Your opponent has retreated the rook to threaten your last bishop. We're not going to leave the bishop unprotected, right? Black is desperately dreaming of promoting a pawn to a queen. Don't react to that at all. Move your pawn forward. At a certain point, Black can no longer advance his pawns, and his other pawns will step in to protect it. That doesn't matter, because he doesn't have much time left to live. He can live out his final moments freely. Black moves. You move. Realizing he's about to be checkmated, your opponent is now forced to change his strategy. In a panic, he captures your pawn with his knight. However, he's trapped by your rook, which he didn't notice. Since he can't move his knight, you can bring your rook here to capture his other knight. It's now impossible to save that knight. What did I do wrong? The knight protests as he bids farewell to the game. Time is running out for your opponent, who is desperately moving his pawns forward. At this point, you could capture his knight and score a point, but I can suggest something even better. Move your other rook to the g-file as well. Look at the king's position. It's in a terrible spot. He's just waiting helplessly. From this point on, it could have been checkmate. But your opponent isn't that stupid. By moving his rook to c8, he'll temporarily resolve this crisis. But that would be an incredibly foolish move. You should move your bishop to e6 to capture the pawn. That way, you can also put pressure on the rook, and there's a 100% chance the rook will move to f8 because he needs to defend his knight. So, what would you do at this exact point? Do you have any ideas? You should do what I've been saying from the very beginning of the video. Attack. Maybe you can threaten the king with your knight. The rook takes the knight, and you take the rook with your bishop. The king is still in a desperate, helpless situation. Throughout the entire video, there were countless moves that could have defeated your opponent. Isn't that right? But this game is already over. No matter what your opponent does at this stage, the outcome is clear. The rook says hello to the black king. Your opponent's knight says goodbye to your rook. The other rook then brings this story to a close with checkmate. What do you think of this strategy? You can support my future videos by sharing different strategies you'd like me to try in the comments.